What's up, Guava Bees? You're listening to the Dear Guava Bean podcast, and today I'm speaking with Max, who is a remote data scientist. In this episode, we talk about what data science actually is and what skills you need to learn to do this job. I also ask him how much data scientists get paid and how he got started in this niche. Max explains how it all works, and he gives examples of the types of projects he works on. And he also explains how to get started if you're interested in doing this work. This is a really fascinating freelance niche, so get ready to learn some cool things. I'm not going to lie, it wasn't easy keeping up with Max on this topic, but I really loved getting an inside look into the life of a data scientist, and I hope you do too. Enjoy! Hey Max, thanks for joining the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, what do you do as a freelancer or a digital nomad?
So I work as a data scientist, and basically my role is there's a lot of things to do, but ultimately I work with all of the data that kind of goes into our company, and I try to make sense of it. And this can be on the user side, so trying to understand, like our user journeys, how our users are going through a product, and maybe we can use that to optimize our onboarding. This also goes into building the product itself. So the company that I work at is actually focused on providing data and making it more usable to video game players in this sense. So building out that aspect of the data component and understanding, okay, how can we use this data and actually give it to someone in a way that makes sense to them? And then it's also having this, or looking more into the back end of data and just, making sure that the way that we're processing data is done correctly, that there aren't any like technical bugs, bugs in the code of how we're handling your data, and also, having my hands a little bit in the data pipelines, although that's also kind of where there's this gray area, and everyone's role as a data scientist is a little bit different based on the company's needs, but it's all centered around using the data that your company has available, both internally as well as externally, and trying to make great use of it.
Interesting. That is super interesting. I think when most people think of data science or like data scientists, it sounds like a really hard job. Is it?
It really depends. I think a lot of it depends on, like what you're interested in, because data science is such a general term. And if you think about any science discipline, from the social sciences all the way to like the natural sciences, those are all sciences and they all deal with data. And so, like data science is just even a more general term to basically encapsulate any type of thing that you can do with data in more of like a scientific nature. But, and like people that do psychology, may find it difficult to do chemistry, and I've studied physics, and I know for me personally, like the psychology aspects are much more difficult because it's something that I haven't studied. So like data science itself is very particular to you, and what's also really nice about it is that you can do data science in the area that you're interested in. And so I think, it has this really bad rep, and I think, or not bad rep, it just has this rep of that it can be difficult, and I think that's more because it's so ill-defined, and it's a very broad term that actually just encapsulates a ton of different stuff. And I think that's kind of, where that would come from.
Yeah, you're right. It is a very broad term. Like when you think of data scientists, it's like, what does that actually mean? But hearing you explain it, it makes sense. It is kind of like a science of data. It's basically you study the data and then you make conclusions or you like find out stuff that can help the company.
Right, exactly. And a lot of it is just, like you come in with this plan, like, okay, we would like to answer this question. How can we use our data to answer this question? And so a lot of data science is actually you having this domain knowledge, like if you're in marketing, for example, and you start really actively integrating your data, a lot of people know that as growth hacking. But a lot of that cool stuff comes from bringing in those cool ideas from your marketing background knowledge, and then just using the data to tell you these, initiatives are working, and these ones are not working. And so in that way, and especially if you're working in like a digital environment where you can iterate very quickly, it becomes much easier to optimize what you're doing and find those right solutions, because you're basically getting answers to all of your questions. But a lot of it is, just asking the questions, which just comes from, whatever field you're working in.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. I see how data can really help with marketing and other parts of the business. Like, as I work in marketing, and all of the decisions that we make have to do with the numbers. What do the numbers say? What is the data telling us? And then if you make those decisions from a place of knowledge and information, it usually ends up being, much better decisions overall. So I understand how companies can use data to like improve all other areas of their business.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's also, why I think it's so nice is because it kind of goes both ways. You can start with your domain knowledge and become data literate, basically, and start to incorporate that data back into your domain. But you can also then get more comfortable with maybe doing a little bit more technical work with the data. And then you can branch out into another domain and using your data skills, like better learn and approach that domain, because you can get feedback onto what you're doing, and so in that way, it's also it kind of works both ways, that you can go in it, but then you can also go somewhere else with it, which also, of course, makes it very fun, and that's also something that I've been able to do a lot working on like our product at first, but then also like basically applying very similar skills to try to understand how our users use our product, which is something that is not something at all from my physics background, but is something that just comes from doing a bit of research, but then trying to apply these same principles and, seeing, okay, how does this apply to our users instead of maybe their performance in a video game? So yeah, it's very versatile, which makes it very nice.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I never thought about it that way. I always figured that you have to kind of niche down and learn like a specific thing, and then that's just the one thing that you do. But it sounds like you can kind of try to apply the same approach, like the same data science approach, to different areas.
Yeah, and a lot of it actually comes back like onto each other, because your users are always going to be your most important thing. If your users are happy, it does. If your users aren't happy, it doesn't really matter what else is going on, because no matter how cool you think things are, if your users don't like it, then it doesn't matter. So it's always like good to have that perspective in mind, and just being able to also just come back to the business component, which is something that people who come from a technical background may not think about it at first, like how does my work, how is it directly going to impact the business, and how is it going to work towards business goals? How is it going to work towards making our user base more happy, more engaged, more satisfied? So, like learning those skills will also feed back into like the other work that you can do when you're maybe working on the product. Now that you have this background knowledge of like how your users generally use your product, you can think about that and maybe try to prioritize your own work, so that you're not going deep diving into a direction that isn't going to be very practical for the product itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Making decisions based on users instead of based on, guesses. Or a lot of companies, they create based on what they want, like an entrepreneur will create what they think people want instead of looking to see what their users want, collecting that data, and then using that to make decisions. So it is very smart when you can have that data or have someone that finds that data for you and is able to interpret it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice. I remember when I was first introduced to like the user components, you notice that a lot of the setup of like really famous websites that you may use, for example, like Facebook or Pinterest or something like that, they've actually used a large amount of data science to optimize their onboarding experience, because they found that I think Facebook has this thing that you should have 7 friends within 10 days. And so if you sign up to a new Facebook account now, it's likely that your onboarding experience is going to be directed to you as a user reaching those goals, because they found that people who have at least 7 friends are going to get much more of the value of the platform. And Pinterest, in the same way, is going to ask you to list your interests or, like follow specific boards, because they know that people who input this and are seeing the things that they want will become much more engaged and will actually get much more out of the platform than if you were just allowed to sign up and basically have immediate access to the product, because it can be a little bit confusing, especially for new users coming into a product that they may have not used before.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those huge companies probably pay a lot of data scientists to, research all of that stuff and help them because that is such a huge part of their business. But is data science something that like a small company can do, like just an entrepreneur, or do you find that typically data scientists work with big companies that have like large amounts of data to process?
I think data scientists can, they would range from basically like the smallest of companies to the largest. The way that you may look at this data scientist from the outside, the roles that they're taking on may be a little bit different. But if you think back to what data scientists actually do and, what their goal is of just trying to combine domain knowledge together with data, trying to properly use data to answer their questions to help them work towards their goals, you will find them in, I mean, basically you can find them in like solopreneur startups where the entrepreneur themselves they're working by themselves and they may not even have funding, so it's critical for them to be able to properly understand their data so that maybe like they don't invest all of their time into a social media channel that's not working, creating content for one channel and the other channel is popping off for them, but they're not really putting any of their work in. So like being able to prioritize your own time, is something that you can start even with a one-person company. But of course, the bigger the company gets, the more defined this kind of like sole data science position almost becomes. And there's also just room to have a, like a sole data scientist that will mainly work on this, because if you're like a solopreneur or even a small company, not all of your work is going to be focused on data. It's going to be doing your thing, checking the data to make sure you're going in the right direction, maybe adjusting course a little bit and then continuing on. And of course, the bigger the company gets, the more data you're going to have too, which means it would just be more work to process all of it. But also the more room you have, to have either a single person, which you can have for like small size startups, to maybe a small team, which you can have for like medium sized companies, to even like whole departments, or what you may also find in like these really large companies is they have a data scientist in every single one of their teams. So they have like data science departments, but the data scientists themselves are actually put into a product team, and they work together with like a product owner and like engineers and maybe also like like a marketing team or something like that. So you've got this small sub team that itself is in control for parts of the product. And I mean, yeah, you can even go bigger than that. You can have whole data science teams by themselves just working on exclusive data science solutions. So yeah, the roles that data scientists can take on are very different across very many different companies, and a lot of it is just also based on the company's needs, and how the company feels like it can best benefit from using their data while also trying to get everything else done.
Interesting. That's cool. How long did it take you to learn how to be a data scientist?
It's an interesting question because I started learning data science skills before I even knew the term data scientist existed, because I was doing my bachelor's, and during that time I was interested in like doing this analytical work, but I was doing it in physics, which is a natural science. So like for me, all of it was based towards like trying to understand like physics experiments and evaluating like an experiment that you would do in like your physics lab, which is just one of those courses. But it turns out that a lot of those skills are actually transferable to other parts. And I also took a programming course there, which again, was more out of my own interest than for anything else. And so I actually started, I guess, learning about this stuff throughout university. But I wasn't really focusing and working towards building out like data science skills, also because I just didn't know they existed at the time. And after I graduated from university, I went into an internship. And during that internship, that's the first time I actually heard the word data science. And so that was the first time I actually put my mind to learning data science. And so I had some of the skills from before. I knew how to program in Python partially. It needed some work. And I knew how to analyze data, but it was limited to physics. So I needed to learn other analysis techniques. I also needed to become familiar with like other domains because I wasn't working in physics anymore. I wanted to enter the business world, so I needed to be familiar with, like things that are more relevant to business. And so that whole process, it took me 6 months of continuous learning. So I would always learn for about an hour after work and about an hour on the weekend. Not every day, but I would try to do my hardest to do it every day. And sometimes it would be more, sometimes it would be less. About that time, so yeah, it took me about that time, and that time also included the work I did myself to like build up a portfolio project and send off an application. So it took me about 6 months of concrete learning while working at a full-time job to then learn those skills to actually get my first data science gig.
Interesting. So you kind of just learned it on the side in your free time while you were working.
Yeah, exactly. My internship was mainly focused on like business, and that just wasn't really playing to my strengths. I knew like I also like I liked kind of like this more analytical background. I liked thinking about using numbers and using data. It felt a little bit more natural to me to like maybe just go back and like just look at some data and just understand what it means in the context that you have it in. And so, yeah, once I found out about that, I knew this was kind of like, this is what I need to start learning. And so it was very important for me to make sure I get those skills so that I can actually transition into this field. And so yeah, that's kind of like what was driving me, is that I just really wanted to switch into this field because I knew this would like let me do the work that I enjoy
Yeah,
doing.
that's very important, doing stuff that you enjoy. Do you think that anyone can learn to be a data scientist, or do you think this is something that you have to have kind of like a background in it or like a passion for this type of work?
No, I definitely think everyone can learn data science. Actually, when I started, I remember when I started to try to learn programming, I tried to learn in high school and stuck with it for about a month and then I quit. And then I did it in college again and then I quit again. And then I had to do it one more time and that time it stuck with me. So even my own journey, like I was not set up to be a data scientist. It rather came from the realization that like this is actually something that I would enjoy doing. And so now it gave me purpose to learning what I wanted to learn. And the data science skills themselves, also just because, like the data science work can take on so many different forms, you can really tune it to what you're interested in. So I think anyone can learn data science, and such a large part of data science is taking in your own knowledge and basically contextualizing the data with the knowledge that you already have. And in that way it makes it really adaptable. And that's also like why there are so many different forms of data science. And that's also why I think it's accessible to anyone, because there's so many different ways that you can apply it, and you can really tune it to your own. And like I said, you can go into the marketing department, you can become a growth hacker by bringing in or like taking up these data science skills and kind of approaching all of your marketing with a more technical and analytical perspective in addition to the marketing work that you're doing. Um, you can also go much more into like user research and product research. So like making sure that your products are performing or that your product health is good, trying to understand how you can improve your product. And if your product manager comes to you and says, like, hey, we want to make these two changes to our product. So either, we want to make our product load faster, or we want to introduce this new feature which we feel like can really add a personalized component, but like may have longer loading times for some users. Which one should we go with? That is also something that you can approach, like with data science. But of course, the skills that you're going to be using there are going to be slightly different than the other skills, and a lot of it just comes back down to your background knowledge and how well can you use your background knowledge to approach these questions. So yeah, I definitely think, it's accessible to anyone. And I think even just small data science skills can really benefit you, just to bring in just like a little bit of data literacy, so that you can steer your work if you ever have questions or if you ever have data that you're looking at.
Yeah, you mentioned small data science skills. What would be like some small or like fundamental skills that you think every data scientist needs to have, regardless of what area or niche they go into?
I think it's really important. I think the most critical thing that you should have as a data scientist is being able to take a very broad topic and break it down into smaller questions that you can actually help answer, through data. So, for example, if you want to look at, okay, what social marketing channel should we go for? What marketing channel should we put our work into? Being able to take this more broader question, because that itself is like that question can have very many different answers. There are many different ways that you can look into it, and just breaking it down. Okay, let's break down our different social marketing channels. How much work are we putting into each of these? How much engagement, are we getting from it? What is our reach? But not also like, how many people are engaging with our content, but also what does that mean for the business? Is there any direct like revenue from it? Because it could be that you may have a lot of people engaging with you on Twitter, but no one's really going to check out your website. Whereas on Instagram, you may have less engagement, but the people that are engaging with you feel a lot more personal. And so those people actually move on and a become a user of your product, or they become like a regular user. And so being able to break down this more general question of, okay, what marketing channel are we going to go with, to, okay, how can I break this down, and how can I evaluate the performance of each of these marketing channels, and how can I compare them, and basically answering all these small questions with data. And then you have your different results, and you can say, okay, this is, what YouTube is doing for us, this is what Pinterest is doing for us, this is what Facebook is doing for us, this is what Instagram, whatever, is doing for us. And then you can compare them, and now you have your answer to your big question. And so having that skill and being able to just take a moment, sometimes it's more than a moment, of course, to take that question and just break it down into smaller questions, and then seeing, okay, how can I best answer these questions with the data that's available to me? It's a really, important skill, I think, for data scientists to have. And it doesn't even, require any technical knowledge, because you can get all of that data from like Google Analytics or Mixpanel, if you're using that, or some other tracking platform like Facebook, their Facebook ads platform. They will also give you statistics. So just being able to break down these questions into more manageable chunks is, I think, extremely important for data scientists.
That's very interesting. I thought you would say something like programming or computer skills, but it sounds like it's more of an analytical skill, like a mental ability to take a big problem, make it into like, or a big question, make it into smaller ones, and then like systematically go after the answers until you get to the big final answer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are definitely technical components involved, and like the more of a data scientist you want to become, the more likely it is that you're going to need to have these technical components, because something that you'll find out, and it's likely if you're playing around with like just standard analytics platforms like Google Analytics, you may see like, I don't have all of the data available to me that I want, or I'm not able to see the data in a way that I want to. So maybe you have like a metric like mean time on site, but you're much more interested in looking at like a distribution of how long people are spending on your website, so that you can understand, like, this is not just my average time, because if you have an average time, then people who spend like 2 hours on your website are really going to distort that average. So maybe you want to understand, like, okay, what does the distribution of my users look like on my website? But if you're using an analytics provider, they may not be able to do that for you. So, the more technical experience you have of being able to take that data and basically create that distribution yourself, so that you can see it, so that you can actually answer the question that you're looking to answer, is, of course, really important. And of course, the more you want to work towards just solely doing like data science focused work, rather than using data science as a skill to supplement your own work, the more you're going to need ultimately these technical skills. Because a lot of times you'll just find that the custom analysis is the only way that you can truly get the answer to the question you're looking for. Because analytics platforms are meant to be used by everyone. So they're meant to be general, but every business has its own needs. Every business has its own key metrics that it wants to track. And of course, these big platforms can't implement all of these different metrics for all of these different businesses because that's just not feasible. So being able to do that yourself can, of course, be very important and is also something that is expected of, data scientists that want to work purely like mainly as a data scientist and maybe want to be like integrated into like either a product team or something like that. Just being able to take the user data, write down your own questions, and maybe get some insights from the product manager, and then just taking the data and doing the analysis yourself, and then coming up with some nice visualizations or some nice analytics, and being able to storytell with your data basically in a way that a platform just wouldn't let you do because it's too general.
The storytelling part is very important. This is something I hear business owners often complain about. Like they get the data, but they don't know how to read it, they don't understand it. And so they need the story behind it. I think that is a very good skill for any data scientist to have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think part of the storytelling also just comes in because you're spending so much time with your data. And so you're basically going through your analysis in a structured way because you have the structure in your head. Like, first, I need to know this, and then I need to know this, and then I need to know this. And only with these three things together will I be able to answer my question. And so it's important that you don't just keep this in your head, but you can do the same thing because if you're presenting your results to maybe like the CEO of the company and you're saying like, hey, we need to focus on Instagram because it's performing the best, and they're like, why? And you're like, well, because that's not very good. But if you walk them through your analysis, and visual is always the best, it's always the easiest to see things visually. So if you can show them, like, hey, look, like we have this many people that are interacting with our posts, and most of our followers will always interact. So we've got like 80% of our followers that are always engaging with our posts. And, like 60% of these people are going onto our website, and we can actually keep track of these users. And of those users, like 50% of those people that go to our website are going to spend like a significant amount of time on there, and some of them will convert into a funnel. That's a great way to show someone who hasn't spent that much time with the data why this is important. And that's also part of your job because it's not just your job to keep everything in your head, but ultimately you want to have a business impact too. And so there's no point in doing an analysis if it doesn't result in anything. You want to make sure that your work and your time is actually implemented. And so it's very important that you can communicate your results to other people. And of course, that maybe you also have those soft skills so that A, they understand you, and B, you can convince them that what you're saying is actually true and that they should listen to you because you've spent a significant amount of time trying to solve this problem for them.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask a general pricing question because it sounds like data science is something that is super useful for companies. Like there's a lot of value that it provides. And it also is quite a rare skill or, a not so easy to acquire skill for the person. So it seems like data scientists would be, let's say, like well paid, more paid than a virtual assistant or a copywriter or something that is a little bit easier to learn. For the people out there who are wondering, like, what does a data scientist actually make? Like, let's just say on an hourly basis, what would you say is like the average range for a good data scientist or like an experienced one?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it really differs a lot, first of all, on the country. I think country or location plays a large role because like you've got the companies in like Silicon Valley, and these companies will easily give you, like 160K or something a year as an entry level data scientist. Then you've got maybe normal companies in the US, which will maybe pay you somewhere between like 80 to 100K. Again, it depends on, first of all, like the cost of living too. The cost of living just within the US will fluctuate a lot, but of course, across the world, it will also fluctuate a lot. If you move into different countries, so if you move into Europe, for example, the salaries are a bit more regulated. And so there, the entry salary, I think, for a data scientist will be around 60,000 euros. But if you work in Europe, then you have the advantage. For example, in Germany, we have, I think, 30 vacation days a year or something like that. So, that's something that you don't have in the US, and you have like all of this health insurance and all that stuff that comes with it. So there's more in the overhead that you're getting. So that's kind of what you'd be looking at for companies. I'm not super familiar with hourly rates because also the data science work that I'm doing is for a company. So, it's more based on like monthly and yearly salaries. I have done some freelance data science projects. These these can pay very well. So I've had a data science project that took me about 5 hours to do for $600, which is an hourly rate of over 100 an hour. So that worked very well for me just because like they wanted a quick data science solution and I was able to create that solution for them. And so, in that case, it was a smaller project. But yeah, data science salaries can go very, very high very quickly. And especially because these are all just like entry level salaries, they can scale even higher. And a lot of it will at some point, if you're at a company, will include stock options. If you're working for small businesses, so if you're working for a startup, of course, it will also include stock options. If you're working on a freelance basis, then the data science is going to bring you benefits in different ways because you'll very quickly have a system down where work that may have taken you 5 hours to do now takes you an hour to do. And so even if your rate may not change, or maybe it will over time too, but even if your rate doesn't change, all of a sudden you're spending a lot less time working and you're still making the same. And it's likely as you'll get more experience, you can offer more, which means you can charge more, and you're working less because you know how to do it. So there's definitely there's a very good starting potential, but I feel like it only goes up as you become experienced because it will come more naturally to you, which means you will spend less time doing it, but you also have more experience, which means you can charge more for it. But yeah, so yeah, that's what it looks like. And that's kind of also the hourly range, I guess, that I can give from my own freelancing experience.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed listening to the Dear Guava Bean podcast. If you'd like to hear the second half of this episode, log in to the Freelancer Toolbox or go to guavabean.com to start your free trial now. As always, our goal is to empower you with the information, inspiration, and direction you need to achieve financial freedom through online work. Thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. See you in the next episode.